Today, I want to kick off a three-part video series on pipeline management. And I want to start by talking about how to make sure you actually hit your quotas. So, your sales quota is really the goal that you're trying to achieve, whether it's quarterly or annually, however you look at that. And that is determined by a couple of things. One, you probably as a business sit down and say, look, these are the numbers we want to hit, why we want to hit them, and all that. It's sort of irrelevant to this video. It's a good practice to sit down and set those numbers and have those goals. But what I really want to talk about is how do you hit the goals? So once you've calculated what you need to do as a business, how do you make sure you're hitting that? And what I typically do is I look at the goal and say, look, let's say your goal is $1,000,000. You need 5 to 10 times that in opportunities in your pipeline to ensure that you hit the goal. Why is that? Well, primarily it's just an industry standard, but it's also a guide in your first 12 to 24 months because initially when you're new to the market, you don't have any data. So you need some sort of guide that you can use. So I typically say somewhere in that 5 to 10 range as your multiplier. And so if I'm trying to hit $1,000,000 a year, I need at least $5 to $10 million worth of opportunities in my pipeline. Now, why is that? The reason is some of those are going to drop out. Some of those are going to get pushed into the next year. Some of them you're going to compete and you're going to lose. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And so we want to make sure you have enough in your pipeline to hit your goals. Now, here's another thing that people have a challenge with where they miscalculate how much is in their pipeline. So if you're bidding on multi-year contracts, do not put all of those option years in this year. So when you're looking at your pipeline, only put the base year on this year. And even then, let's say you're halfway through the year and this RFP is coming out in the fall and you don't expect it to get awarded till maybe October 1, then maybe you only put a quarter of that base year. Maybe you put none of that base year because you're like, look, even if it gets awarded October 1, we may not start work until December or whatever it may be. We may not actually realize any revenue on this until January or February of the next year. So you've got to look at this and say, hey, how accurate are the numbers that I'm putting into my pipeline? Because again, this will trip you up if the number isn't accurate, if you've added all those option years, if you haven't looked at where that revenue is going to come from. There's all kind of things that can trip you up. That's why we say at a minimum, you start at that 5 to 10, that factor there, and that will help you zero in on making sure you have enough opportunities at all times to hit your goals. Then you can also look at there's milestones, pipeline breakdown, all kind of things like that also factor into, do you have enough opportunities in your pipeline? Like what kind of opportunities are they? How big are they? What are the chances of winning? There's all kind of things like that. But if you just focus on making sure you have 5 to 10 times your actual revenue goal inside that pipeline, the odds are you're going to hit your goal. You may even exceed your goal. And then after a year or two, you can start to look at that number and say, look, we actually hit much harder than it. So we are closing more than I thought. So instead of doing a 5 or a 10 factor, we only need a 3. We really only need 3 times the amount. So if we're trying to do $1,000,000 in revenue, maybe we only need 3 million in the pipeline. So as you go, you need to examine that data and you'll adjust that number to the left or right. And then I just recommend you continually look at that number because the worst thing that could happen is, let's say a year or two from now, you're like, wow, we're really good. We're closing a lot. And so you lower the number and then all of a sudden something happens and you miss your goal and you're like, what happened? Well, maybe your conversion rate changed or maybe your messaging was off or something changed in your business. So constantly reevaluate that number. Maybe every 6 months, every 12 months, constantly reevaluate, are you putting enough? Are you factoring enough opportunities in the pipeline? Because again, the last thing you want is to be doing as much as you possibly can with what you have and then realize, oh, I can't even hit my goals if I close everything in the pipeline because I don't have enough opportunities. So remember, at a minimum, when you're first starting out, 5 to 10 times your revenue goal. Adjust annually after that. And if you have questions, you can just reach out to me. Now, I also, while I have you here, I want to make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you get part 2 and part 3 of this series. Next week, I'm going to deep dive a little bit further into pipeline management, and we're going to talk about what the pipeline breakdown should be for new and existing businesses. So make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you next time.